Hey everybody, this is Jason Akers with Akers Pest Control, and I'm kind of taking it easy. Just got home from work. It's pretty late in the evening, but I wanted to talk about the worst crawl space, termite job, understructure, moist barrier protector thing, whatever, moisture, what is it?
Moisture barrier.
Yeah, moisture barrier, that I have ever done in my entire career, which is going on about 30 years now. I was young. I was probably about 17 years old, and there was this man that he lived kind of like a hermit. He was, I don't know if it was maybe like a mental illness or something like that that took his life, but the man passed away. He had a really beautiful home at one time. It was a really nice house, and he had these dogs, like 4 or 5 big dogs, not small dogs either, like Labrador sized dogs, pretty good sized animals, living inside his home with him. And they had free roam of the house. They were able to go in and out of the house, and they were able to go out on the porch and play on the porch. And what happened is when the guy started, I guess he really, as far as the story that I understand from what was told to me, is the man started to slowly lose his mind. I don't know if maybe he had Alzheimer's or some kind of dementia, or he just didn't really care to visit down and talk to people or anything like that. But from what I understand from stories that have been told to me from the people that actually took over the house when he passed away, is that's what happened to him. He kind of, started to become a hermit. He didn't really like to hang out with people, and he kind of let the dogs free roam over the whole house. They weren't house trained, and so they would come in the house and they'd go on the floor and poop and stuff all over the place. And so, well, being a person, you don't want to live in that. I don't know of anybody that really would. And so he had these holes about 1 foot in diameter drilled in the floor, perfect circle holes drilled in the floor of his house. And whenever he would want to clean up after the dogs, he would bring in a water hose and he would spray the whole floor all over the place and wash the poop down into the crawl space. Now, this created a swamp-like environment underneath the house. Now, the reason that this is when I was really young. I was 17. It's probably about 20 years ago. I was working with my father, and the house had termite problems because the whole house wasn't wet under the whole thing, just where the holes were drilled through the floor. And so they had termites coming in the house. And so what happened was when the house was sold, the guys that bought the house needed to treat it for termites, and they needed to treat it for mold. Now, when I say mold, normally when you go into a house that has mold problems, it's kind of peppered. Exterminators, anybody that wants to can comment on this video, but I'd like to know, honestly, I'd like to know some of your stories. Anyway, I got a lot of exterminators that watch me. I'd like to know your stories below, if the crazy crawl space stories, because I know a lot of people have them. They exist in this business. It's just part of the work. I mean, if you're a pest control, you do crawl spaces. Everybody does. At some point, they've got to go underneath the house. But anyway, the crawl space wasn't wet under the whole house because, as people know, termites, they can't survive in a really wet environment, eastern subterranean termites. And so because they'll drown. They can't travel back and forth through all the water. And so, but up near the front of the house where there wasn't any holes drilled through the floor, that's where the termites were. And where the holes were drilled, there was fungus. Now, most people, when they get fungus on the wood, when mold grows on the wood, it looks like pepper, like, if you take black pepper and you kind of shake it out, it gets like black specks all over your tabletop. It basically looks kind of like that, but all over the wood where the mold has started to grow. It makes little black spots and white spots on the wood. Well, because he had such an extensive amount of water going underneath the house, the mold was growing on the side of the floor joists sticking out probably a foot. It was shelf fungus, like what you see in the woods growing on the side of trees. That's what was growing on the wood underneath the house. And the reason it was so wet, because most people, in a crawl space, they have ventilation. This house, and that's my wife, she's got a cough, but most people have ventilation. So you get the little vents in the side. They're about a foot long, about the size of a cinder block, typically. And you'll get cross ventilation under the house to dry the house out. He didn't have any. So it was just a watery, soupy, poopy mess. I call it poop soup. It was like crawling. Now, we had to crawl under the house. There was about 2.5 to 3 feet of space under the house for crawling under. And there were a couple of spots where you could kind of duck walk under the house, like, not actually have to crawl. When you first go under the house, it had a pretty good sized crawl space door. The one thing I remember, and I still remember today, even though it's been about 20 years, was the smell. The smell, to say it burned the nose hairs would be mild. It was the smelliest, nastiest, stinkiest, grossest thing. And I was wearing a respirator because you don't want to go under a house that's full of poop everywhere and mold everywhere without wearing a respirator. Not just, a dust mask isn't good enough. Some people will go under like a house with a dust mask. I've gone under a house with a dust mask before when there's lots of like dust around and, the dusty, sandy soil and stuff stirs up everywhere. You don't want to breathe it in. But I actually went into this house with a respirator because it was, you got to take care of your health when you're crawling underneath a house like that. I had rubber gloves, thick rubber gloves. I had a Tyvek suit, not just a typical crawl space coveralls, but I had actual Tyvek wrapped up around my arms and my legs so that it would be mostly waterproof. And what you do when you do this kind of job is you roll the plastic out. Now, a sheet of plastic that you buy from like Lowe's or Home Depot, something like that, it comes in a little roll that's about 3 feet long. And you roll it out and then you unfold it after you've rolled it. So as you roll it, you start to unfold it. So you're actually not crawling around on the dirt. You're crawling on the plastic. But what happens under this house is when you start crawling, to be I'm going to be as descriptive as I can, your knees would suck into the plastic, and they'd actually make those noises, like little slurping noises when you try to pull your knee out from the plastic because it was so wet and soupy underneath the house. And I still remember, it was funny. My mother had actually called my father. My father was the only one at this time that actually had a cell phone. This is back when cell phones were new technology. Most people had pagers. I had a pager for when I would run my route. I had a route at 17. I'd go out and do my own pest control route. He got a call from my mother, and she said, "I know you guys are doing this understructure for this house. Do you want to stop and come and visit us? We came out to town. We'd like you to come for lunch." And I can remember today, my dad's like, "Do you realize the kind of work that we're doing? Do you realize that I am crawling around, and excuse my French, do you realize I'm crawling around in a whole bunch of shit? I do not want to eat anything right now at all." And I told my dad, I looked at him and I said, "Dad, I'm hungry. I could eat." And he's like, "I don't see how you're hungry. The smell alone is just nauseating." And I said, "Well, I'd like to eat a sandwich. I'm hungry." So we took off our gloves and everything, and we drove down to the McDonald's to meet with my mother. We had ourselves a Big Mac and I think a quarter pounder, I think is what I had. I was young. I was hungry. I was a teenager, and I ate a lot when I was a teenager. And so, but she said we stunk awful. She said, "You be sure to take off all those clothes and you put them in the back of your truck. Don't you bring them in my house at all." And it was just, it was pretty nasty. So anyway, if you've got any nasty stories or gross stories about crawl spaces, send them my way. I'd love to hear them. Post them in the comments below, and like and subscribe to my channel if you like videos like this. Hopefully I'll have some more crazy stories for you in the future. You guys have a really great day. Oh, my wife has a question. What's the question?
So that terrible story.
That terrible story.
I know another one. The one where the snake slithered past you underneath of the Crawlspace.
Yes.
Which was worse? Was the poop still worse?
Yeah, the poop was worse.
Oh, see, I'd rather call.
Okay, so my wife brought up. Now I don't want to make this too long because it's already like 10.5 minutes long. But one time I had to do a termite inspection on a home underneath the house, and it had a crawl space. It was a pretty good sized crawl space. And it was a black snake that had gone up underneath the house. I opened the crawl space door, and the snake went right past me and went right all up in the house. And I went right on up underneath the house with it, because people, I mean, if you know, black snakes really won't bother you. And as long as you leave them alone and let them go about their business, they're not going to bother you. So I went right on up underneath the house with the snake. I've been under houses with snakes. Snakes don't bother me. So, she said she would rather be under the house with poop than under the house with a snake. But I'll tell you right now, this is one thing about that crawl space. Now, it was nasty. It was disgusting. It was gross. But I wasn't alone. So that made it a little bit easier. The fact that my dad was under there with me made it a little bit easier to cope. But there has never been a crawl space, no matter how tight, no matter, like she's just said, a snake went under the house. I don't care. As long as I don't have to crawl through that nasty, soupy, poopy mess ever again, I am just overjoyed.
What about being under the crawl space with black widows? I mean, spiders used to.
Well, yeah, I've been under houses with black widows and all kinds of spiders. They don't bother me. Nope. Spiders don't bother me. Crickets don't bother me. Yeah, I don't like poop. I don't like poop.
I hate bugs.
I don't like. Well, you like crawling in poop? You want to crawl in a bunch of turds.
Well, you have kids and you expect to get poop on you.
Well, I mean, yeah, but kid poop is not the same as dog poop. It's dog turds. It's a house full of runny dog turds. It is just disgusting.
I hate spiders and snakes.
Oh, you just didn't smell it. You don't know. You didn't smell it. Anyway, you guys have a real great evening. Appreciate it. Thanks.